Have you ever felt like something is shifting within you? Like the universe is preparing you for something extraordinary? Perhaps you've noticed peculiar synchronicities, or you're experiencing an unusual sense of inner peace you've never felt before. What if I told you these aren't random occurrences, but rather profound signals that you're finally ready for true love? Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed that the universe communicates with us through symbols, synchronicities, and internal transformations. He understood that true love doesn't arrive when we desperately seek it, but when we've undergone a profound inner evolution, when we've become psychologically and spiritually prepared to receive it. Today we're diving deep into 6 powerful signs that, according to Jungian psychology, indicate the universe is aligning to bring true love into your life. These aren't superficial dating tips or surface-level advice. These are profound psychological markers that show you've completed essential inner work and are now vibrating at the frequency of authentic love. Whether you're healing from past relationships, questioning if you'll ever find the one, or simply feeling a mysterious shift in your energy, this video will illuminate exactly where you are on your journey. By the end, you'll understand not just the signs, but the deeper psychology behind why true love appears precisely when we're ready, not a moment sooner. So settle in, grab a notebook if you'd like, and let's explore the fascinating intersection of Jungian psychology, universal energy, and the mysterious arrival of true love. But before we begin, if you're someone who's fascinated by psychology, self-development, and understanding the deeper patterns of life, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This channel is dedicated to exploring the profound wisdom of great thinkers like Carl Jung to help you understand yourself and your life's journey on a deeper level. Now, let's begin with the first sign. Sign 1, you've stopped searching. The first and perhaps most paradoxical sign that true love is approaching is this: you've stopped desperately searching for it. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Wait, if I stop looking, how will I ever find love? This is where Jung's wisdom becomes absolutely essential to understand. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow self, those parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. When we desperately search for love, we're often running from our shadow. We're trying to fill an internal void with an external person. Jung believed this was psychological disaster in the making. Here's the truth. When you're frantically searching for love, you're actually broadcasting a frequency of lack. You're telling the universe and yourself that you're incomplete without someone else. This creates what Jung called a negative complex, an energetic pattern that actually repels authentic connection. Think about it this way. Have you ever noticed how people can sense desperation? It's palpable, isn't it? That's because desperation carries an energy signature. It says, "I need you to complete me," which is an enormous burden to place on another person. Jung spent years studying alchemy, not as literal chemistry, but as a metaphor for psychological transformation. The alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but Jung understood this as transforming our base, unconscious patterns into consciousness and wholeness. When we stop desperately seeking love, we've begun this alchemical process. But let's get practical. What does stopping the search actually look like? It doesn't mean you become a hermit or delete your dating apps out of bitterness. It means you shift from seeking to being. You stop scanning every room for potential partners. You stop analyzing every interaction as a possible romantic connection. You stop mentally planning your wedding with someone you just met. Instead, you become genuinely present in your life. You pursue your passions not to meet someone, but because they genuinely interest you. You attend social events not to find a partner, but because you enjoy the experience. You work on yourself not to become dateable, but because growth itself becomes fulfilling. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated individual. And here's the magical part. When you stop searching and start living, you naturally become magnetic. You radiate authenticity, confidence, and wholeness. These qualities are infinitely more attractive than any pickup line or dating strategy. I want to share a story that illustrates this perfectly. There was a woman named Sarah who spent her 20s and early 30s desperately trying to find a partner. She joined every dating app, went to singles events, asked friends to set her up constantly. Every relationship she did enter was anxious and clingy because she was terrified of being alone. After another painful breakup, she decided to take a full year off from dating entirely, not out of bitterness but as an experiment in self-discovery. She traveled, took up pottery, joined a hiking group, started journaling, and went to therapy. She explored what Jung would call her inner landscape. By month 10, something remarkable happened. She realized she genuinely enjoyed her own company. She wasn't counting down the days until her year off ended. She was simply living fully, richly, authentically. And then at a pottery class in month 11, she met someone. But this time it was different. She wasn't evaluating them as a potential life partner in the first 5 minutes. She was just present, being herself, enjoying the moment. That chance meeting led to a relationship that has now lasted 7 years. And she says it's completely different from anything she experienced before. Why? Because she entered it as a whole person, not a half desperately seeking her other half. This brings us to Jung's concept of the syzygy, the divine couple within each of us. Jung believed we each contain both masculine and feminine energies, what he called animus and anima. When these internal energies are balanced and integrated, we no longer need someone external to complete us. We're already complete. And from that completeness, we can create a true partnership rather than a codependent merger. So the first sign is clear. If you've stopped desperately searching and started genuinely living, if you feel complete within yourself rather than lacking, the universe recognizes you're ready. You're no longer trying to use another person to avoid your inner work. You've done that work, and now you're ready for a true partnership of two whole individuals. Sign 2, you've made peace with your past. The second sign that true love is approaching is profound. You've genuinely made peace with your past relationships and wounds. Carl Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This statement is absolutely crucial. When it comes to love and relationships, every unhealed wound, every unresolved trauma, every relationship pattern we haven't examined exists in our unconscious. And from that shadowy place, these wounds orchestrate our relationships like puppet masters pulling invisible strings. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly attracted to the same type of person? Perhaps emotionally unavailable partners, or people who recreate familiar painful dynamics? This isn't coincidence. Jung called this a complex, a cluster of unconscious associations, emotions and patterns that get activated and literally take over our behavior. The most common complex in relationships is what Jung identified through his study of the anima and animus, our internalized images of the opposite sex, usually formed through our relationships with parents. If you had an absent father, for instance, you might unconsciously seek partners who are emotionally distant, recreating that original wound in an unconscious attempt to heal it. But here's the beautiful truth. When you make peace with your past, these complexes lose their power. You've brought them into consciousness, examined them, understood them, and integrated their lessons. So what does making peace with your past actually entail? First, it means you've stopped blaming your exes for everything that went wrong. Now, I'm not saying you should excuse genuinely harmful behavior or abuse. Not at all. But Jung would say that even in toxic relationships, we need to examine our role, not to shame ourselves, but to understand our patterns. Why did you stay so long in that relationship that wasn't serving you? What fear or belief system kept you there? What were you trying to prove or heal? These questions aren't about self-blame. They're about self-understanding. Second, making peace with your past means you've forgiven, primarily yourself. Jung believed that guilt and shame create what he called psychological poison that contaminates everything, including future relationships. When you're carrying unprocessed guilt about how a relationship ended, or shame about your choices, you're not fully available for new love. Forgiveness in the Jungian sense means integrating the experience. You acknowledge what happened, you understand why it happened, you accept your role without drowning in shame, and you extract the wisdom. Then you let the emotional charge dissolve. Third, you've identified your patterns. Jung was obsessed with patterns because he understood they were the language of the unconscious. Do you always choose partners who need fixing? Do you shut down emotionally at the first sign of conflict? Do you abandon relationships when they move toward deeper intimacy? These patterns aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies. You developed, often in childhood, but true love requires you to see them clearly and consciously choose different responses. Let me share another story. There was a man named Marcus who came from a home where love was conditional. He learned early that he had to be perfect to receive affection. As an adult, he unconsciously chose partners who were critical and hard to please, recreating that childhood dynamic. Relationship after relationship followed the same script: intense initial attraction, then escalating criticism from his partner, then Marcus trying harder and harder to be good enough, then eventual collapse. He blamed his crazy exes for years. Then he started therapy and deep self-examination. He began to see the pattern. He realized he was unconsciously attracted to critical people because their approval felt meaningful. It replicated the conditional love of his childhood. He was trying to finally be good enough to earn love. This realization changed everything. He spent 2 years doing inner work, learning to validate himself, understanding that love shouldn't be earned through perfection. He made peace with his childhood, forgave his parents for their limitations, and forgave himself for his unconscious patterns. When he eventually entered a new relationship, it was completely different. His partner was kind and accepting, and at first Marcus felt no attraction, because his nervous system was wired to interpret criticism as love. But he consciously chose to stay, and slowly he rewired. That relationship is now thriving because Marcus entered it healed rather than hoping the relationship would heal him. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. Marcus's childhood wound had been directing his love life from the shadows, and he kept calling it bad luck or crazy exes. When he brought it into consciousness and healed it, everything changed. Jung also spoke about the wounded healer archetype, the idea that we're often most powerful in the areas where we've been deeply wounded and consciously healed. When you've made peace with your past relationships, you're not just ready for love. You're ready for conscious, mature love that doesn't repeat old patterns. The universe, or what Jung might call the collective unconscious or the self, recognizes when you've completed this work. The energetic signature you emit changes completely. You're no longer unconsciously seeking someone to heal your childhood wounds. You're seeking a true partner for the next phase of your already healing journey. So if you find yourself reflecting on past relationships with understanding rather than bitterness, If you can see your patterns clearly without drowning in shame, if you feel genuinely complete with those chapters of your life, this is a profound sign. You're ready. Sign 3. You're experiencing meaningful synchronicities. The third sign that true love is approaching involves one of Jung's most fascinating contributions to psychology. Synchronicity. Jung defined synchronicity as meaningful coincidences that can't be explained by cause and effect. He believed these weren't random at all, but rather evidence of a deeper layer of reality, where the external world mirrors our internal psychological state. Now, before you dismiss this as mystical nonsense, understand that Jung was a trained scientist and psychiatrist. He didn't arrive at the concept of synchronicity lightly. He studied physics, consulted with quantum physicists like Wolfgang Pauli, and spent decades documenting these phenomena in his patients' lives. Here's what he discovered. When people are undergoing significant psychological transformation, particularly during the individuation process, synchronicities dramatically increase. The external world begins to reflect and support the internal shifts happening within. So what does this look like when true love is approaching? You might suddenly keep encountering the same symbol or number repeatedly, perhaps 11:11 on the clock, or a particular animal or a specific phrase. You might have a vivid dream about meeting someone, and then encounter uncanny elements from that dream in waking life. You might randomly think of an old friend you haven't talked to in years, only to run into them an hour later, and they introduce you to someone significant. But here's the crucial distinction Jung made. Not all coincidences are synchronicities. A true synchronicity has 3 elements. First, there's an external event. Second, there's an internal psychological state or need. Third, there's a meaningful connection between the two that can't be explained by ordinary causality. For example, simply seeing repeated numbers isn't necessarily synchronicity. Our brains naturally look for patterns. But if you've been deeply contemplating whether to take a chance on love, feeling fearful but curious, and then you keep encountering the number sequence that represents new beginnings in numerology, and each time you see it you feel a profound sense of confirmation, that's approaching synchronicity. Jung believed these events were messages from what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness and the central organizing principle of the psyche. When you're aligned with your path, when you've done the inner work and you're ready for the next phase, the self communicates through synchronicity to encourage and guide you. Let me share a particularly striking example. There was a woman named Lena who had been single for several years after a divorce. She'd done extensive healing work and felt genuinely ready for partnership. But she was also cautious. She didn't want to repeat past mistakes. She had a particular connection to butterflies. Her grandmother, who'd been her primary source of unconditional love, had a butterfly garden, and butterflies had always symbolized her grandmother's love and presence. After she passed away, one morning Lena was journaling about her readiness for love and her nervousness about being vulnerable again. She wrote, "If I'm truly ready, give me a sign, Grandma." Moments later, an unusual butterfly, one she'd never seen in her area, landed on her balcony door and stayed there for nearly 10 minutes. Now, a skeptic would say this was just a random butterfly, but for Lena, given her internal state, her specific request, and the timing, it felt deeply meaningful. It gave her courage to remain open. 2 weeks later, at a farmer's market, a stranger's dog got loose and ran straight to Lena, tangling her and its owner together in the leash. They laughed, helped untangle themselves, started talking, and discovered profound compatibility. That stranger is now her partner. Was the butterfly a message? Was the dog incident random? Jung would say we're asking the wrong questions. The point isn't whether we can prove supernatural intervention. The point is that when you're in alignment with your deeper self, when you're ready for transformation, the world seems to conspire to support you. This connects to Jung's concept of the collective unconscious and a shared layer of the psyche that connects all humans. Perhaps synchronicities are the collective unconscious communicating with the individual psyche, creating meaningful patterns that support growth and connection. In practical terms, what should you do with synchronicities? First, notice them without becoming obsessive. Jung warned against what he called inflation, believing you're specially chosen or that every tiny coincidence is a cosmic message. That leads to psychological imbalance. Instead, maintain what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold both rational and symbolic perspectives simultaneously. Second, reflect on what the synchronicity might mean for your internal state. If you keep encountering couples who are clearly in love, what does that stir in you? Is it longing? Is it readiness? Is it fear? The external synchronicity is less important than the internal response it evokes. Third, follow the energy with discernment. If synchronicities seem to be pointing you toward a person or situation, engage with curiosity but not recklessness. Remember, the universe isn't removing your responsibility for wise choices. Jung believed that an increase in synchronicities indicated that the conscious and unconscious minds were coming into alignment, that you were living in harmony with your deeper self. And in that state of alignment, you naturally attract people and circumstances that match that frequency. So if you're noticing meaningful coincidences, if symbols keep appearing, if the world feels more magical and connected, if you're experiencing what some call flow, these are signs. The universe, or your deeper self, is signaling that something significant is approaching. You've reached a level of consciousness where you can perceive and participate in these deeper patterns. And in Jung's understanding, there's no coincidence more meaningful than two people meeting at exactly the moment when both are psychologically prepared for true connection. That's not luck, that's synchronicity at its most profound. Sign 4, you've integrated your shadow. The fourth sign is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated, and it comes directly from Jung's core teachings. You've begun to integrate your shadow. This is where Jung's work gets truly revolutionary, and understanding this concept can completely transform not just your love life, but your entire existence. Jung defined the shadow as all the parts of ourselves that we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge, usually because we've been taught they're unacceptable. Your shadow contains your rage, your selfishness, your desires, your jealousy, your sexuality, your power, essentially everything your ego considers not me. Here's the crucial insight. The shadow doesn't disappear when we repress it. Instead, it gains power in the unconscious and begins to control us in ways we don't recognize. And nowhere is this more destructive than in romantic relationships. When you haven't integrated your shadow, you'll project it onto others. You'll attribute to your partner all the qualities you can't accept in yourself. This creates what Jung called psychological possession. You become literally possessed by unconscious contents, reacting with disproportionate emotion to things that trigger your shadow material. For example, if you've repressed your own anger because you were taught nice people don't get angry, you might find yourself disproportionately triggered by even minor expressions of anger in partners, or you might unconsciously choose partners who express anger freely, allowing them to carry your shadow for you. If you've denied your own neediness and vulnerability, you might be extremely critical of partners who express emotional needs, calling them needy or clingy when they're simply being human. This projection creates a fundamental dishonesty in relationships. You're not actually relating to the real person in front of you. You're relating to them, plus all your projected shadow material. It's like wearing distorted glasses and then blaming the world for looking strange. But here's the beautiful part. When you've integrated your shadow, even partially, because this is lifelong work, everything changes. Shadow integration means you've honestly examined the parts of yourself you'd rather deny. You've admitted, yes, I'm capable of jealousy. Yes, I have selfish impulses. Yes, I sometimes feel rage. Yes, I'm insecure about certain things. Yes, I want power and recognition. This isn't the same as indulging these qualities destructively. It's about acknowledgement. Jung believed that when we acknowledge and integrate our shadow, we gain access to enormous amounts of energy and vitality that were previously tied up in repression. A person who has integrated their shadow is infinitely more attractive and capable of healthy relationship than someone who's still pretending to be perfect. Why? Because they're real. They're honest. They don't need you to be perfect either. Let me illustrate with a story about a man named David. David grew up in a religious household where certain emotions, particularly anger, sexual desire, and ambition, were considered sinful or inappropriate. He became what Jung would call overly identified with the persona, his social mask. David presented as kind, selfless, and spiritual, but relationships kept failing in the same way. Partners would initially be attracted to his seemingly gentle nature, but eventually they'd complain he was passive-aggressive, emotionally unavailable, and made them feel guilty for having normal human desires and frustrations. What was happening? David had repressed his anger, sexuality, and ambition so deeply that he couldn't access them consciously. Instead, they leaked out sideways, in passive-aggressive behavior, in moral superiority that made partners feel judged, in a sexual discomfort that created distance. After a particularly painful breakup, David entered Jungian analysis. Over 2 years, he began the uncomfortable work of shadow integration. He had to admit he did feel anger, lots of it, and that his niceness was sometimes a defense mechanism. He had to acknowledge his sexual desires weren't shameful. He had to admit he was ambitious and wanted recognition, despite his spiritual persona suggesting he was above such things. This process was excruciating. Jung called it the dark night of the soul, and it often is. You have to face the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. But on the other side of this process, David became a different person. He was still kind, but now it was authentic kindness, not a mask to hide his shadow. He could express anger appropriately when needed. He could be vulnerable about his desires and needs. He could admit uncertainty and imperfection without his entire self-concept crumbling. When David entered his next relationship, everything was different. His partner felt she could be real with him because he was real with himself. She could express frustration without him collapsing into shame or defensiveness. She could be sexual without him being conflicted or distant. They could disagree without him retreating into moral superiority or passive-aggressive silence. That relationship is now in its 5th year and thriving, not because they're perfect, but because both are committed to consciousness, to seeing themselves and each other clearly, shadow and all. Jung believed that the individuation process, becoming a whole, integrated person, required confronting and integrating the shadow. And he believed that true partnership required 2 people who'd each done this work, at least to some degree. Why? Because love, real love, requires you to be seen, truly seen. If you're still hiding behind a persona, terrified of your shadow being revealed, you'll create relationships based on performance rather than authentic connection. You'll exhaust yourself maintaining the mask, and you'll feel lonely even in partnership because nobody actually knows the real you. But when you've integrated your shadow, when you've admitted your flaws, your fears, your forbidden desires, you become free. You can be loved for who you actually are, not for who you're pretending to be. And that kind of love is unshakable because it's based on truth. How do you know if you're integrating your shadow? You stop being shocked or overwhelmed when you notice negative qualities in yourself. You can say, yeah, I felt jealous in that moment without your entire identity collapsing. You can admit mistakes without defending or justifying. You can receive criticism without becoming defensive or devastated. You notice when you're projecting, and you take back your projections. You also become less judgmental of others. Jung noted that we're most critical of qualities in others that we've repressed in ourselves. When you've integrated your own capacity for laziness, you stop being ragefully critical of lazy people. When you've accepted your own insecurity, you stop being contemptuous of others' insecurity. This doesn't mean you accept everything. It means you respond to others' behavior from a place of understanding rather than projection. You can set boundaries without needing to vilify the other person. If you're finding yourself more accepting of your own humanity, your contradictions, your shadow qualities, your imperfections, this is a profound sign. You're becoming a whole person, not a persona pretending to be perfect. And wholeness is magnetic. It's authentic. It's what makes true love possible. The universe doesn't send true love to those who are perfect. It sends true love to those who are real, conscious, and whole enough to recognize and honor that same wholeness in another person. Sign 5, you're comfortable with solitude. The fifth sign that true love is approaching is deceptively simple but profoundly important. You're genuinely comfortable with solitude. Carl Jung spent considerable time studying what he called the individuation process, the journey toward becoming your authentic self, separate from collective expectations and conditioning. And central to this process is the ability to be alone without being lonely. Jung himself valued solitude deeply. He built a tower at Bullingen where he could retreat from the world, stating, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing, which makes my life worth living." He understood that true psychological development requires periods of withdrawal from external stimulation to connect with the inner world. But our contemporary culture has created a peculiar problem. We've confused solitude with loneliness, and we've made being alone seem like a pathology to be fixed. We're told that being single is a problem requiring solution, that spending evenings alone means something is wrong with us, that we should always be busy, social, connected. This creates what Jung would call a collective neurosis, a shared psychological wound. We've lost the ability to be with ourselves, to tolerate our own company, to find fulfillment in our inner world, and this inability makes authentic love nearly impossible. Here's why. If you can't be alone without feeling desperate or depressed, you're not looking for a partner, you're looking for a distraction from yourself. You're seeking someone to fill the void, to quiet the inner emptiness, to distract you from whatever you're running from. Jung would say you're trying to use relationship as a defense mechanism against individuation. You're avoiding the essential psychological work of developing a relationship with yourself, with your own thoughts, feelings, dreams, and depths. Relationships formed from this place of solitude and tolerance become what psychologists call codependent. Both people need the other to avoid feeling their own aloneness. The relationship becomes a prison of mutual need rather than a choice of mutual desire. But when you've become genuinely comfortable with solitude, when you enjoy your own company, when you don't experience weekends alone as torture, when you can sit with silence without immediately reaching for your phone, something magical happens. You're now relating from choice rather than need. You want companionship, but you don't need it to survive psychologically. This completely changes the nature of the relationships you create. Let me share a story about a woman named Maya. For most of her 20s, Maya was in constant relationships. The moment one ended, she was back on dating apps, terrified of being alone. She mistook the anxiety of being single for proof that she needed to find someone quickly. Her relationships were intense but unstable. She was clingy and anxious, constantly needing reassurance. Her partners felt suffocated. She felt abandoned whenever they needed space. The pattern repeated endlessly. After her longest relationship ended, a therapist suggested something radical. Take at least a year completely off from dating, not to punish herself, but to learn to be alone. Maya's initial response was panic. But what if I miss my chance? What if I get too used to being alone? What if everyone else finds someone and I'm left behind? These fears, her therapist explained, were exactly why she needed to do this. She was operating from scarcity and panic, not from choice and abundance. The first 3 months were brutal. Maya felt restless, anxious, bored. She realized how much she'd used relationships and dating to avoid herself. Without that distraction, she had to face questions she'd been running from. Who am I? What do I actually want? What am I afraid of? Why do I feel this underlying emptiness? She started journaling, meditating, taking long solo walks. She took herself to movies and restaurants. She sat with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately texting someone to make them go away. She began slowly to develop a relationship with herself. By month 6, something shifted. She realized she was enjoying her own company. A Friday evening alone with a book felt good, not like failure. She stopped scanning her environment for potential partners and started actually experiencing her life. Jung called this developing the inner partnership and learning to engage with your own psyche as you would with another person. You listen to your dreams, honor your needs, respect your boundaries, enjoy your interests, forgive your mistakes. You become your own companion. By the time Maya's year was complete, she didn't want to rush back into dating, but she did remain open. And when she eventually met someone at a bookstore, not a bar or dating app, the relationship was completely different. She could give her partner space without panicking. She could spend evenings apart without feeling abandoned. She could be honest about her needs without being clingy. She was choosing the relationship every day, not desperately grasping at it. Her partner noticed and appreciated this quality. "You're so comfortable in your own skin," he told her. "It makes me feel free to be myself too." That's the magic of solitude comfort. It creates spaciousness in relationships rather than suffocation. Jung believed that we each contain what he called the self, the archetype of wholeness that exists beyond the ego. Connecting with the self requires solitude. It requires withdrawing from external noise and expectations to hear the quiet voice of your authentic being. People who are uncomfortable with solitude are often terrified of this encounter with the self. They're avoiding the individuation process, staying lost in what Jung called participation, mystique, unconscious merging with others that prevents genuine individuality. But when you've spent time in solitude, when you've faced yourself without distraction, when you've developed interests and contentment that don't require another person, you've completed essential preparation for true love. Now, to be clear, enjoying solitude doesn't mean preferring isolation to all human contact. That would be the opposite extreme. Jung advocated for balance, for people who can move fluidly between rich solitude and rich connection, who are complete within themselves but still desire and appreciate partnership. If you find yourself genuinely content with your own company, if you can spend a weekend alone without feeling desperate or depressed, if you have a rich inner life that doesn't require constant external validation or distraction, this is a profound sign of readiness. You're no longer seeking someone to complete you, because you've discovered you're already complete. You're no longer looking for someone to distract you from yourself because you've made peace with yourself. You're now ready for what Jung would call a conscious partnership. Two whole people choosing each other, not two halves desperately clinging to avoid their own emptiness. The universe recognizes this shift. Your energy changes from grasping to being, from desperate to content, from lacking to abundant. And that energy is magnetic in a completely different way than neediness ever could be. Sign 6. You feel an unexplained sense of anticipation. The sixth and final sign that true love is approaching is perhaps the most mysterious and the most thrilling. You feel an unexplained sense of anticipation, like something significant is about to happen. Jung spent considerable time exploring what he called the perspective function of the psyche, the idea that our unconscious mind can sense approaching possibilities before our conscious mind recognizes them. This isn't mystical fortune-telling. It's the unconscious picking up on subtle cues, patterns, and energetic shifts that haven't yet reached conscious awareness. Have you ever had the feeling that your life is about to change? Not because of any logical reason, but because something inside you just knows. Jung would say this is yourself communicating with your ego, preparing you for transformation. When true love is approaching, many people report a peculiar inner knowing. They can't explain it rationally, but they feel a shift in energy, a sense of readiness, an anticipation that's different from wishful thinking or desperation. This is distinct from anxiety or desperate hoping. It's a calm, grounded sense that something is aligning. It feels like standing on a train platform knowing your train is coming soon even though you can't see it yet. There's patience in it but also alertness. Jung believed that when we've completed significant psychological work, when we've reached certain thresholds in our development, the psyche sends signals. These might come as dreams, intuitions, or this sense of anticipation. The unconscious is literally preparing the conscious mind for what's next. Let me share one final story. There was a man named James who'd spent years in and out of unsatisfying relationships. After his last relationship ended, he did extensive work on himself. Therapy, meditation, shadow work, the whole journey. He wasn't looking for love anymore. He was focused on becoming whole. Then, about 3 months before he met his current partner, something strange started happening. He couldn't explain it, but he felt certain something significant was approaching. He started having vivid dreams about meeting someone. Though the person's face was always unclear, he felt an unusual urge to get his life in order, not frantically, but with purpose. He rearranged his apartment, finally finished projects he'd been putting off, decluttered his space and his schedule. He joined a hiking group he'd been considering for months. He felt inexplicably like he was preparing for something. When he eventually met his partner on one of those hikes, the first thing he felt was recognition, not because he'd known her before, but because she felt familiar to his soul, like something his psyche had been anticipating, even though his conscious mind had no idea. Jung called this the transcendent function, when the conscious and unconscious minds work together, creating new possibilities that neither could achieve alone. This sense of anticipation is the transcendent function at work, the unconscious whispering to the conscious, "Get ready, something important is coming." Now it's crucial to distinguish this genuine anticipation from wishful thinking or desperate hoping. Wishful thinking feels anxious and grasping. It's based on what you think you should want or what you're afraid won't happen. It comes from the ego trying to control outcomes. True anticipation, the kind Jung would recognize as meaningful, feels different. It's calm and centered. There's no desperation in it. You're not scanning every person you meet. trying to force them into being the one. You're simply aware that your energy has shifted, that you're ready, and that the universe seems to be arranging something. This anticipation often comes with other signs. You might feel unusually energized and creative. You might find yourself naturally improving your life, not to impress someone, but because you feel called to. You might experience a sense of rightness, of being in the flow of your life rather than fighting against it. Jung believed that when we're aligned with our deeper self, we enter a state of what he called participation in the creative process of the universe. We're no longer separate from life, fighting and controlling. We're flowing with it, co-creating with it. And from this state, we naturally attract the people and circumstances that match our frequency. This sense of anticipation is your psyche's way of telling you, you're ready now. You've done the work. You've healed what needed healing. You've integrated what needed integrating. You're complete within yourself. The next chapter is about to begin. Trust this feeling, not with desperate clinging, but with open-handed readiness. Continue living your life fully. Continue being present. Continue honoring yourself and your journey. But also stay alert and open. Because when you feel this way, truly feel it, not just wish it, something significant is often very close. So there you have it, the 6 signs from the universe, interpreted through the profound psychological wisdom of Carl Jung, that indicate you're finally ready for true love. Let's recap these 6 powerful signs. First, you've stopped desperately searching. You've shifted from seeking to being, from lack to abundance. You're complete within yourself rather than looking for someone to complete you. Second, you've made peace with your past. You've brought your unconscious patterns into consciousness, healed your wounds, and stopped letting past trauma puppeteer your present relationships. Third, you're experiencing meaningful synchronicities. The universe is speaking to you through symbols and coincidences, confirming that you're aligned with your deeper self and your path. Fourth, you've integrated your shadow. You've acknowledged and accepted the parts of yourself you used to deny, becoming authentic rather than hiding behind a perfect persona. Fifth, you're comfortable with solitude. You've developed a rich relationship with yourself and can be alone without being lonely, relating from choice rather than desperate need. And sixth, you feel an unexplained sense of anticipation. Your psyche is signaling that something significant is approaching, and you're ready to receive it. If you're experiencing even 3 or 4 of these signs, you're likely in a profoundly ready state. If you're experiencing all 6, pay attention. True love may be closer than you think. But here's what I want you to understand deeply. These signs aren't a checklist to frantically pursue. They're not about becoming someone different to attract love. They're about becoming more fully yourself through the natural process of psychological and spiritual development. Jung's entire life work pointed toward individuation, becoming a whole, conscious, integrated human being. And what he discovered is that when you commit to this journey, when you do the inner work, when you face your shadow and heal your wounds and connect with your deeper self, everything in your external life begins to align. True love doesn't arrive because you manipulated it or forced it. It arrives because you became ready for it. You reached a level of consciousness where you could recognize it, receive it, and participate in it without destroying it through unconscious patterns. So if you're on this journey, if you're doing the work, facing yourself honestly, healing and growing, trust the process. Trust that the universe or your deeper self is guiding you toward exactly what you need exactly when you need it. Don't rush. Don't panic. Don't abandon the work because it's taking longer than you hoped. Some of the most beautiful love stories begin when people are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond, because that's when they'd finally become whole, enough to create conscious partnership. Your job isn't to force love or to become someone you're not. Your job is to continue the sacred work of becoming yourself, of waking up, of living consciously and authentically. Do that and love will find you, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Not because you have no wounds, but because you've brought those wounds into consciousness and extracted their wisdom. Before we close, I want to leave you with one of Jung's most powerful quotes. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. True love isn't about finding your other half. It's about two whole people meeting and choosing to grow together, to transform together, to create something that neither could create alone. So wherever you are on this journey, honor it, trust it, keep doing the work. Keep becoming more fully yourself. Keep healing, integrating, and waking up. And stay open, because when you're ready, truly ready, the universe has an extraordinary way of delivering exactly what you need. Thank you so much for watching this exploration of Jungian psychology and the signs that true love is approaching. If this video resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up. It helps more people find this content. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives into psychology, consciousness, and self-development. And here's my question for you. Which of these 6 signs resonated most deeply with your current experience? Are you noticing any of these in your own life? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear about your journey and insights. Remember, the journey toward love is ultimately a journey toward yourself. And that journey, my friends, is the most worthwhile adventure of all. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and keep trusting the process. True love is worth the wait, and you are worth the work.